Level 3 essentially deals with some of the basic cables and connectors that are used in television production. First of all, we want to talk about the audio connections, audio cables that are used. The most common one that you see everywhere from rock bands to television stations, anywhere else, professional audio connectors are what we call XLRs. XLR connectors are 3-pin connectors. They also have the name Canon. You will sometimes see them called a Canon connector because Canon used to make them pretty exclusively. They don't anymore. But they are referred to by their gender. All connectors are referred to by their gender. In other words, this is the Canon male connector, obviously because it has projections in it. And this is a Canon female because it's a receptor. So every one of these connectors you're going to be talking about is referred to in terms of being male or female. So it would be a male XLR or a male Canon, a female XLR or a female Canon. Okay? So this is the one you will be using later on when we show you how to set up the headsets, because this goes with the headsets that you saw hooked up on level 2. Another common connector that you use all the time in television production is what we call a 1/4-inch plug. It's called a phone plug because in the old days when you had operators working on switchboards, this is the plug they used. That's where it came from. And it's a 1/4-inch, what's called a 1/4-inch plug. You also have other kinds of plugs. One of them is an 1/8-inch plug that Sony developed, and you use it on your old, on your iPods and everything else. It's the common one, stereo or monaural. And we can talk later on about stereo and monaural settings on these things, but it's half the size, you might say, or diameter of the shaft on a 1/4-inch plug, and it's called an 1/8-inch or a Sony plug. The last of the audio plugs I want to mention today is what is called a phono plug, and it was developed by RCA and Motorola, slightly different plugs, but they both essentially are the same. It was used originally with turntables, and now of course it's used for inputs in consumer video, audio, all kinds of things like that. Okay, when it comes to video connectors, the variety is a little less rich, shall we say. What you're looking at right now is referred to as a BNC connector. It's a push-on and snap-on connector that is the standard for professional video connections even to this day. Even with all the changes to digital, it's pretty much the standard video connector. You're looking at the male version of this. And one thing you need to remember, and this is true also for many of the audio plugs, there are always female versions of these plugs, and they quite often appear on the chassis or on a mount somewhere, and the male connector is hooked into the female connector. But these are called BNC connectors. Another connector that has become quite popular in video it's referred to as the RCA. And the RCA connector is modified slightly for mounting and things like that, but it essentially is the same connector and the same size, but now used in a video situation. So this is an RCA male video connector. The other one here that I wanted to show you today is what we call the F connector, and it's probably the one you may be the most familiar with. You have push-on, you have screw-on F connectors. They're the ones that normally are used to get a signal from your antenna, from your cable, to your television set, whether flat screen, whatever it might be. And these are referred to as F connectors. They're the kind you see in the classrooms that hook up to the smart boards. They're the kind, again, that you see at home all the time. These are males. And again, the females would be on the actual television set itself or on the smart board hookup, things of that nature. We have all of our cables here at SJET organized along this pegboard, and for the most part I think they're in the right places. Some of them aren't, but obviously we have that set up with what's called a cable log for audio especially. The video is not as complicated, so we don't have a separate one for it. But basically what this does is it gives you the standard cables and where they can be found. For example, the XLR male to female is going to be located down here at A17, A17, right down here is that connection. If you look here at A17, you see XLR male to XLR female. Quite often you use adapters in this business. So for instance, like an A2 is an XLR female to a 1/4 inch male. These are things you can learn over time, but be aware that there is a chart here and these cables are placed according to this chart. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we ask you to learn how to coil cables, especially the microphone cables and the cables that are used for the headset setup. They are the same, one and the same type of cables. And one thing you never do with a television cable or any cable for electronics is treat it like you would a power cord that's being attached to your electric edger or something like that at home, where you take it like this, put one end of it here, and you start wrapping it around your elbow. What you do actually when you do that is you twist the cable, and eventually the cable becomes so twisted, it becomes very difficult to get it straightened out, and on top of that, sometimes the wires inside break. In television, you learn how to coil a cable. I hold one end of the connector, one connector of the cable in my left hand. I then grab the cable, stretch it out, and I come underneath like this to create a coil. And then I go back over the other way to create a coil in the other direction. What I'm doing essentially is twisting and untwisting the cable. And that way you end up with a cable that should be, if we got all the little knots out of it, should be able to grab one end, drop it, and it would be just flow out perfectly straight.